Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar of 2020 that we're doing. Just go through a few bits and pieces and hopefully wait for a few other people to join in. So thanks for attending today. I'm Mark Lawson and I run Business Vision accountancy practice, but we specialise in helping businesses grow profits, cash flow and spend less time doing it, as well as obviously the more mundane stuff like accounts and tax returns. So thanks for coming along. Yeah, so those of you who aren't familiar with GoToWebinar, just a quick run through of the features you've got. So basically, the little arrow there will minimize the GoToWebinar screen. So that'll just give you a bit more space to see these slides. There's then the bit there, basically, which will go through audio controls. You should find that you're muted so that people can't hear you, but you can hear me. Otherwise, they'll be able to hear kids and dogs running around in the background. And you can also see in the handout bit, there should be the workbook for today, which you can obviously download. And that will give you all the slides and so on. So, fair bit to go through. You have to excuse me, I've got a slight cough today, so if I'm just refreshing myself occasionally, excuse the pauses. So, on the agenda, we're going to go through the 5 A's of change. So we're going to go through what change means for businesses and the sort of things you need to get in place. We're then going to go through the roadmap. And bear with me. Going to go through the roadmap and then basically look at the key subject today, which is 7 ways to grow. Then we're going to go through the growth equation, which is a way of looking how much you can grow by and how to achieve it and what ifs. And then we'll go through, as we always do, the next steps and how we can support you, whether you're a client or not. There are ways that we can help achieve the things that we go through today and get you to where you need to get to. And then if there's time at the end, sometimes there is, sometimes if I rabbit on too much, there isn't. But if you've got time at the end, we'll go through questions and anything you've got, we can try and answer. And you can, as I say, type the questions into the little GoToWebinar screen there, and then I'll collate those at the end. I say, if I haven't got time to go through them today, it will give me your email addresses, so I'll come back with answers by email if it's not done live. Okay, so a fair bit to get through. So first bit is FTI, and that basically stands for one of two things depending on how you look at it. One of the biggest problems with change in business and growing profits and cash flow is failure to implement. So a lot of people will know, at least on basic levels, what to do, and they'll know how to do some of these things. A lot of the things we talk about aren't completely unknown items. A lot of businesses will have read up, they'll know these things, but doing them is a lot harder. So knowing what to do, but failing to implement any of those ideas is the same as doing nothing. So with change, we're going to look at how we can start to achieve that. And then the other way of looking at FTI is what we call follow through immediately. So taking action and doing stuff that's going to have an impact on your business day to day. So some wise words for today. This is by Thomas Jefferson, which was about 230 years ago. If you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done, which is the sort of reverse of if you keep doing the same stuff, then you'll keep getting the same results. So we are looking at change, as always, particularly in today's climate. And we're just going to go through how to do that in basic terms, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what to do with financials and some of the things in your business. So first thing we'll look at is the 5 A's of change, and this is a 5-step process of how to achieve change within a business, but in basic terms. So first one is awareness. So you need to be aware, stating the obvious, but you need to be aware that change is required. So you need to be aware, for example, that cash flow isn't adequate. for what you want. You need to be aware that the hours you're working in the business are too much and not acceptable. You need to be aware that profits aren't at the level that other businesses are making, for example. So awareness is the first thing. Second thing is acceptance. So once you know that things need to change, you then need to accept that you will have to make those changes in your business. So I say it's not going to happen by chance. Things have to happen within your business. Things that do happen by chance in businesses tend to be negative. You don't tend to get surprise money coming in. You do tend to get surprise bills. You don't tend to get people taking a load of work off you. You do tend to find that you're giving more work than you thought you were going to get. So accepting change is required. Not easy, but the alternative of not changing isn't easy either. Then obviously you need to take action, and that's probably the hardest bit for most people. That's where they get stuck for two reasons, I think. Partly because they don't always know what to change, so they know change is needed but don't necessarily know what it is that needs doing, what's the right changes to make, where do we need to make them. But it's also about, I think, comfort zones. So even in businesses, business owners, teams have comfort zones, and change obviously by definition is going to move people outside those. So for example, if a hairdresser sets up in business, the comfort zone is cutting hair still. They're still basically doing the work they did before, but they're now doing it in their own business. So looking at change, which might be delving more into the financials of the business and running the business rather than cutting hair, is obviously not what that person thought it was all about. It absolutely is, but obviously that's a change in the nature of what they do, a change in their comfort zone. So taking action isn't always easy, and if action is taken, it tends to be more of the same rather than the things that people aren't comfortable doing. So they didn't like doing marketing before, it's unlikely they're going to start looking at marketing as something that needs to be looked at. Fourth thing is accountability. So in order to get past number 3, which is making the change, as with all things, whether it's losing weight, giving up smoking, if you make yourself accountable and have somebody else actually being aware of what you're doing and being somebody to go to keep you on track, that's going to help enormously. So accountability is just to make sure that somebody other than yourself is looking at the actions you're going to take and making sure you're doing them in an appropriate time frame. And the last thing is, once you've done all that, is to acknowledge what you've achieved. So there will still be more changes required, but at least go back and acknowledge, do post-mortems and reviews of what you've done, and you and your team can celebrate where you've got to so far, but also accept that there is probably more still to be done. So if we look at, for example, the accountability bit, it's really, for your business journey, it's about having co-drivers. And I would recommend that you do this even if you don't feel it's necessary. And if you read up on any of the most successful people, they will have numerous co-drivers to assist them. So nobody does it alone. Richard Branson will have loads of people. Even the most successful people have business mentors and coaches. So who's going to do that for you? It could be another successful business person that you might know. It might be other half, although I would suggest that's probably not ideal. It may be another team member. It can obviously be people like ourselves as accountants to hold you accountable. And I say, without even doing any further services, if you have got action plans and you want us just to nag you to see how you're getting on, we will do that as a standard courtesy. So hopefully you've gone through those 5 bits and pieces in terms of change. We now need to look at the roadmap. So how do we get from where we are to where we want to get to? The roadmap to go from A to B, and that's really looking in more detail at exactly what sort of changes are going to be required and where they're going to be needed. And again, some of this is fairly obvious in terms of what we need to do. So first bit is identifying where you are now. And I do, in meetings and in seminars, regularly refer to things like car journeys, holidays, boat journeys, as being very similar to business journeys, because they still require you to know your starting point before you can work out how the journey is going to go. So stage one in businesses is where are you now, which might sound obvious, but not everybody knows exactly where they are in terms of their business financials or their business key numbers. So I speak to a lot of businesses, some of them still very successful, very big, but the key numbers that drive their businesses aren't known on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and some don't look at their financial accounts on a regular basis. They may not even have them prepared on a regular basis, and don't look either because they're not being prepared or because they don't understand them. So need to know where are we exactly now before we can then work out where do we want to get to. So point B is the destination. If it's a holiday, is what's that going to look and feel like exactly for it to be successful. If it's a road journey, where are we trying to get to and when do we want to get there? So we need to know B. And the only thing I would suggest with identifying the end position is obviously there needs to be a time frame, but there also needs to be a degree of additional success. So don't aim to get where you think you're going to get to, because that's likely to happen. Aim for somewhere that's actually stretching your achievable targets. Research has shown that most people who set targets will tend to fall just short, and very rarely will they exceed them, because mentally they're actually stopped doing what they need to do when they know they're approaching it. So make it a perfect point B rather than what you're prepared to accept as a point B. And then, as I say, the third bit is timetable, because we can all go, we want to be millionaires, but if we don't set a time to that, every year we can go, well, obviously not yet, one day, and we're into the Del Boy principle of we can kid ourselves that we're on the way, but if we haven't got an exact date, then we can't actually say when we've done it. And I would say for profit type stuff, that's relatively short term, 1 to 3 years. Exit strategy might be slightly longer term, but they need dates. So if somebody says, I want to retire with £1 million, there needs to be specifics. What date will that be? Is it a birthday? So is it midnight that birthday? And is it £1 million in the bank? Is it £1 million sales of the business? Is it £1 million after tax? So be specific. Otherwise you can kid yourself, and don't make it vague. So if you're trying to lose weight or give up smoking, you can always go, I'll eat less or I'll smoke less. But that means very little in terms of accountability, because it could be 1 cigarette less or 20. It could be 10 calories less a day or 1,000. Nobody knows. What will you need? So once you know what the journey roughly is going to look like, you need to work out what you need. So that generally for a business is going to be, what type of people, what cash reserves do you need, what knowledge and information do you need, and what time to do things do you need. And then, of course, during the process of that roadmap, you'll be checking that you're on track all the time. So if you're taking a journey, let's say you're doing a road journey to Land's End, which might be, I don't know what it is, but let's say 80 miles. So you've got to travel 80 miles in a car starting from, let's say, Plymouth. What you wouldn't do is drive 80 miles before you look out the window to try and get an indication of where you are. You would be looking for signs at some point. So within 20 minutes, you'd be expecting to be going over Tamar Bridge and so on. You'd be expecting the signpost to say Land's End is actually less distance. If it starts to look like it's more and you haven't yet gone through Tamar Bridge, chances are you've taken the wrong turning on the A38 and you're heading towards Exeter. So again, just be aware that you need to check things regularly, and I would suggest minimum monthly for day-to-day numbers. For a lot of businesses, including ours, we do ours weekly, so we have a regular get-together Monday morning where we compare those numbers and see exactly where we are as a team. So weekly or monthly, depending on size of the business to some extent. So a specific roadmap. So there's an example here where I've listed out the key numbers for now. So position A, which is either where we are now or the last accounts or wherever you want to be looking. So we've got a business that's doing 650,000 a year turnover. Gross profit percentage is 40%. So after direct labour and materials, the business makes £260,000. Overheads £175,000. So that leaves net profit of £85,000. Tax has to come off that. That will be 17 grand. And then there may be some loan repayments which aren't shown in your profit and loss account. There might be a need to buy more assets, and there might be a need to actually add some money to the bank account, so some spare profit. So for last year, that took up £43,000 and left £25,000 for the business owner or owners to take home. So we then start to look at what does B look like, and what is different with looking at B is I absolutely recommend that you start at the bottom and work up. And if this is dealing with numbers that you're not particularly sure about, then that's absolutely something we can help with. It won't take too long to do that. But I think that the starting point should always be, for point B to be successful, let's start with us, the business owners, personally. What are we going to want to take home? Yes, we need to look at maybe hours that we spend getting that. So I've given, for point B in this example, I've said that the business owner wants to increase the 25 to 60. Take home pay is 60. They've identified that there's 50,000 this coming year that will be needed for loan repayments and asset purchases and a bit of spare cash. And we can then work out what sort of net profit we need to do on that. And I can tell you that comes to £137,500 less £27,500 worth of tax. We'll give you those figures. So we now know what the net profit is. What we now need to do is work up further. So we've worked out that the overheads will be 180,000, which basically means if you add profit and overheads, that's what our gross profit needs to be. We've estimated that we can improve gross profit percentage to 45%. And again, working backwards mathematically, which, as I say, take it from me for the moment, but it does then come to a sales figure of 705,000 odd. So we're working backwards to the top figure from the bottom, not the other way around. It's usually the case that people read profit and loss accounts top down, but when we're actually creating a plan, bottom up, starting with your personal requirements and what's the business going to have to do to make that happen. So we can go through that in more detail if you're not sure how to get all those numbers. It is relatively straightforward, but it is a mathematical process. I accept that. So now you know where you're trying to get to and what you want to achieve. You would have some sort of dashboard, which can be a back of a fact packet. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, or there is increasingly a lot of software, especially some that we use, that will do all of this for you and present it in a very neat report that you can give out to your team and board of directors. And that dashboard, a bit like a car journey, is going to show you all the things that tell you how you're doing. So it's going to show you how much fuel's left. Fuel in a business is obviously cash. It's going to show you things like temperature of the engine. It's going to show you basically how many miles per gallon you're doing. If you've got sat nav, it's going to obviously give you that roadmap on a minute by minute basis. So it will tell you how many miles to go to Land's End. It will tell you whether you're on the path that you're supposed to be or whether you need to do a U-turn and so on. But it's also about the less obvious stuff in that journey. So if it's a car journey, then you may need a little measurement of oil. You may need a measure of tyre pressure, for example. But exactly the same type of stuff in a business. And I've given you there just a couple of examples of the sort of measurements that different types of businesses may have. Because they'll be different. Obviously, a retailer will be more interested in sales. I think a manufacturer should probably be more interested in the margin, gross profit percentage, cost of reworks, where they have to go out and do further work, remedial work for free. They're going to be looking at how quickly the money's coming in. So, how long does it take to start the job, to finish it and bill it? How long does it take to collect the money off the customer? Whereas obviously a retailer will be slightly different. He'll be looking at things like how much does each customer spend when they come in, how often do they come in, etc. Now, what's the right KPIs for you? Well, it depends on business to business, but again, we'd be happy to sit down and go through what would be the best KPIs, the best measurements for your dashboard. And I would suggest that unless you've been doing it for a long period of time, that might only need to be a apart from some key accounts measurements, probably only about 4 or 5 other measurements. We do a lot of work with KPIs, coaching for clients. And typically to start off with, rather than have 30, 40 measurements and measure everything you can possibly think of, and it then never gets measured, it never gets looked at, you start with 5. Just measure those, measure them weekly or monthly, see how they're going, and then look at ideas to improve them all the time. Okay, so one of the problems with looking at Plan B that we just did is that inevitably you're going to end up looking at the sales figure as being one of the targets. And the problem for business owners and the team, the salespeople and the sales reps, is if you go out and go, we've just done our plan, we know from the example we've just done that we need to do £705,000 worth of sales, it's quite hard for anybody to actually work out how that's going to happen because it's such a big figure and encompasses so many different things. And what tends to happen then is that all you do is you wait for the scoreboard to come up and you just check whether it's on track. So there's no impetus happening. There's nothing making that figure change. You're just measuring history. And that's a bit like a football coach waiting till 90 minutes are up to see what the score is and then going, did we win? At that stage, it's too late. That number is known, whereas what he should be doing is actually working out what's going to make the desired result happen and check on a regular basis whether each of those things are working to the plan. And then if it's not, you've got time to tweak it. And I always, in meetings and seminars, give the example of the Apollo mission to land on the moon. That's obviously, a huge business plan or a plan to get a spacecraft to land on a specific place on the moon with 3 people and then come back to Earth and land safely with those 3 people still alive. And that requires huge number of manuals, huge numbers of measurements that were happening second by second. But the reality is that the Apollo space mission to land on the moon was only ever on track for about 3% of the time, so hardly ever. So it was almost always not on plan, but at least there were people looking at it during the mission to bring it back and to be successful. So they didn't wait, 6 days and then go, was it okay? Because it inevitably wouldn't have been. So if we look at sales figures, what we want to do is break it down a bit so that we can start to work out exactly what needs to happen in the business and what we might need to measure. So this model won't fit everybody, but there will be a model and this will fit most people. So what we do is basically look at where's the sales figure come from. And the top line you can see there is it's coming from really 3 things. So it's coming from how many customers have you got, how many paying customers, let's say in a year, multiplied by how often do they buy, how often do we invoice them, how often do they come in the shop, multiplied by ATV, which stands for average transaction value, how much do they spend each time. So if you multiply those 3 things together, that will be your sales figure. Obviously it works on averages, but that's fine because we can still measure those. So we've now got 3 measurements that make up our sales figure, but we can go further. If we look at number of customers, we can actually go, well, that's based on how many customers did we have at the beginning of the year? So how many paying customers do we have who are actually on our database? Multiplied by how many of those are going to stay with us and buy in the next year. We call that the retention rate. Plus, how many new customers are we going to add? So number of customers can be broken down into 3 new measurements, but even new customers can be broken down further into how many leads do we get, so how many people are interested, multiplied by how many actually are converted into buying customers, which we call the conversion rate. So if you look at that, there's actually 7 measurements there that are all making up our sales figure and can all be measured and looked at individually, and also obviously are relevant to different departments in the business. So for example, the number of leads will typically be the responsibility of the marketing department, whereas the average transaction value might well be down to the pricing department. The retention rate might be down to everybody in the organisation, because if any of them get fed up or something doesn't go right, they could leave. So that then starts to give more accountability, but it also means we've got a vastly different number of measurements that we can look at, and they all form part of the sales figure. So rather than just go, let's do £705,000 worth of sales, we can now break that 705,000 down into component parts. And I'll show you how we've got some software that can do that a bit later on. Okay, so to summarize then, if your business is going to be the vehicle that you want to deliver the things you need in life, then what we need to do is set an annual plan, create an annual budget, work out and set up the 4 to 5 most important measurements, what we call KPIs, key performance indicators, and then number 4, have somebody hold you accountable to achieve that plan. So hopefully that makes sense. Right, we'll just now go into, in specific detail, the 7 ways to grow profit. And the good news is that there are only 7 ways-ish. I'll come on to some extras at the end. But generally, if you know there's only 7 ways to grow your business, it does tend to focus the mind a bit. Having said that, one of the things we do with clients when we sit down and go through this is we have a list of the 7, but we can then break those 7 down ultimately into 23 slightly smaller methods within those 7. And once we get those 23 ways to grow your business, we then keep a library of ideas for some businesses or all businesses on how those 23 things can actually be improved. And the library of things that we've got, the ideas, runs into thousands. So, what we do is, as we work with businesses, as we read business growth books, as we attend business growth seminars, as we discuss our own business with mentors and coaches, all the ideas are listed so that basically we have a library of stuff to go through which will help the conversation in terms of growing any client's numbers. So although it's 7, the reality is there are thousands of things you can do to grow those 7. It just requires brainstorming and thinking rather than just doing what you did last time. So those are the 4 things, the 7 ways. And let's say these won't be bolts out of the blue for you. The first one, as we discussed before, is to increase the customer retention rate. So if you've got customers coming through the door, buying stuff, then you need to make sure that they are retained as customers, that they continue to do business with you. And clearly customer satisfaction is the best way to do that. So what we're looking at there is loyalty schemes. We're looking at basically not just wowing the customer, but bringing in new things to wow them all the time. The problem with customers and clients is that no matter how good you are at doing something, gradually over time that will become the norm, and therefore a little bit of apathy sets in. So there needs to be new things all the time, new things going on. It's why Apple brings out new phones so often, is partly to make more money, but also just to keep the loyalty rate there, because it would dwindle over time otherwise. So, and it's also about customer contact. So it's newsletters, it's blogs, it's information going up on the website and so on, depending on the nature of the business. Next one, again, is to generate more leads. So it's to get more people interested in buying. It goes without saying that that tends to be the one that most businesses concentrate on, but it is only one of 7, and it's often the hardest to do because there's a lot of competition around. But it's in there, and that's obviously going to be almost exclusively down to the marketing department to generate more leads. And there's obviously thousands of ways you can do that. There's thousands of different channels for doing it. My only recommendation, or 2 recommendations, one is not to pursue one particular marketing channel exclusively. So if you get most of your clients through your website, look at other ways to get them. If you get them all by email marketing, look at other ways. And the other recommendation is to look at the core asset vault that we provide clients free of charge. It's a hugely valuable marketing program online. And I think Steve Hackney, who's the genius behind it, who's been doing sales and marketing for 30, 35 years, he is now charging something like £397 a month to actually buy that software. But as clients, if you are a client, you'll get that completely free. So that is a whole resource there that will pretty much show you how to get leads through any possible method, and it will give you step-by-step instructions. So if you have that and haven't looked at it, I'd strongly recommend you do. If you haven't got a clue what I'm on about, then again, put a note in the chat or the questions saying Core Asset Vault, and I'll come back to you with some information. And we'll also give you a bit more information at the end about a specific thing that's happening with that at the moment. Next one, number 3, is to increase conversion rate. So if the method of you getting sales is to get a lead and then to move them on to a seller, so that might be done through your website. It may not be human beings involved, but technically if somebody visits your website, you still have to convert them into a paying client. So there is a conversion rate process. And again, in my experience, that's probably one of the easiest ways to improve sales. Getting leads is quite hard and it can take quite a while. Conversion rate often isn't anywhere near as perfect as it should be. If it is, then there's probably an issue with pricing too low. So a couple of things on conversion rates, just to give you a flavour, is if you're, let's say, a tradesperson, then absolutely getting that quote out quickly, because a lot of people who are buying don't get, weirdly enough, a quote sent for days or weeks. You know, the tradesman might do all the quotes on a Saturday night. Well, during that time, the customer wants to make a decision. So if they've had one quote and it looks reasonable, they'll probably sign up. And you may not have had yours out there yet. So quick quotes, increasingly, if you can do them at the same time as seeing the client, even better. It's also about understanding what obstacles clients might see before they buy and what objections they may have, and having scripts and answers already trained for as to how that would be dealt with. So the most common one would be, that's a bit expensive. So you need answers to that. You need to explain why it's a bit more expensive and why that still might be the most sensible choice, because you get what you pay for, but they need to know what it is they get that's different from the cheap cowboys out there. And it's about unique selling points. It's about being different from everybody else so that they can't compare you with everybody else. In the old days at seminars, we used to go through yellow pages when they were used and just pull out a particular heading. So it might be plumbers, for example, and we basically go through and say, you know, in this area, there are 300-400 plumbers in the yellow pages. They all do something very similar to what you say you do. So it's not surprising you're not going to get a big share of the marketplace. You're not going to convert everybody because there's so much choice. So the more different you look and the more niche you are, the more chance you stand for getting the business, so that you're almost in your own heading in yellow pages. And again, that's something we're not going to go through in detail today, but we will do in future webinars. Next one is increased transaction frequency. So how often do those customers come back? That will depend on different types of businesses, but it's generally about having new products, new services available. It's generally about making sure that if they're going to make a buying decision again, that they come back to you. And it's also obviously about very much so marketing to existing clients. Next one's increasing transaction value. The obvious one here is pricing, but I'll come back to that in a moment. But if we ignore pricing, it's things like upselling, cross-selling. It's providing them with extras that bolt on to the original. So, you know, one of the obvious examples is McDonald's saying, do you want to go large? Because that immediately adds a little bit more money to the transaction every time, and it costs them very little to provide that to the customer. So key way is at the point of selling, once the selling decision's been made, i.e. the customer has been converted, it's then a time to offer maybe some other things that they might want to consider as well. So if you're selling on a website, if you've got a website page selling stuff, it would make sense that when they're about to click on something and they're going to the shopping basket to pay for it, another offer comes up for a related product to see whether they might want that at the same time. The worst that's going to happen if the buying decision is made, they say no. But a good percentage will say yes because they're already in buying mode. So it makes sense to do that. And obviously, you know, letting people know about other things that you do that might be related. So if you're a car dealership and somebody's just basically signed up for a new car, it's not by accident that the things that they talk about to do with the audio system, the type of tyre details, and maybe the paint, that's all done after the general purchase, because they don't want that to influence the purchase, but it will add substantially to the value of the car, because it's unlikely, if you go through 3 or 4 things, that the client's going to go, I'll have basic plain vanilla, so basic plain audio system, plain chrome tyre rims, standard white or red paint, and so on. There's usually something that they will then add on. So that's done after the buying decision's been made. Next one is basically reducing the cost of sales. So these are the costs that are directly related to doing what you do. So not overheads. And here we're generally talking about efficiency, because if you've got labour doing what you do, chances are that you wouldn't want to be reducing that labour cost by cutting back on wages. It's more likely that you'll be able to actually get the same work done with less people, or to get them to do it more efficiently, to actually have systems in place to achieve what they're achieving better. A number of tradespeople where I see timesheets of people who were employed having to go back and do either remedial work or having to go to a stock supplier because they haven't got the stock they needed to do the job. That's a huge waste of time and money. That could be systemised and planned for carefully so it never happens. So all businesses efficiency, I think, again, is a huge area for improvement. So we're not necessarily talking about cost cutting here. Compare that to the 7th way, which is basically reducing overheads, where typically there is going to be cost cutting, but we need to be careful. Some of your costs are essential and legal, so things like rates, tax, etc. You have very little choice over. Some things are necessary, but you can choose the supplier, so electricity, gas, stationery, and that's a question of comparing value for money, not just cost, because some of them might be better at what they do, and that might be useful for you. So delivering stock within 24 hours might mean you're prepared to pay a little bit more because that suits you. Then you've got basically things that are what I call an investment, which I do very much hope that is how you would see, or certainly how my clients see, accountancy fees, is there should be a return on investment. So if you've got a marketing cost or whatever, or a consultancy cost, then that should be generating more money for you than the cost. And if it does, then the question might be, why aren't we doing more of that, not less? If they're not making a return on investment, then there's a conversation to be had with the supplier. And then there's the other things where it doesn't really matter where you get it from, you just want to get the cheapest going, or you may be able to do away with it altogether. So I'd say that exercise for reducing overhead should be reviewed annually. You might even be able to do a beauty parade of suppliers. So even if it's things like bank charges, you can get a number of banks to actually go, if I'm going to work with you in the next 12 months, what do I need to know so I can compare you with other people? You can go to your stationery suppliers and go, if I pick my 10 most popular things I buy, what are you going to price me for those over the next year? And what else can you do when I'm talking about looking at suppliers with 3 other stationery companies? So that's the 7 ways. I say I've deliberately not gone into too much detail on exactly what you might do in those. For the moment, it's enough to know that there are those 7 ways. We will be looking at each of those gradually in turn over future webinars. There are probably previous webinars on them in our website. But I say each of those areas, there are hundreds and hundreds of things that can be done, and they will be specific to your business. But because I'm feeling generous, I've got a couple more ways I wanted to just run through. So a Brucey bonus. The first one of those is to actually then consider systemizing. So once you've got all those things working, if you've got things in place to increase the conversion rate, if you've got things in place to make customers more loyal, if you've actually got ideas going on to review your overhead yearly, bring in systems to make sure those things happen every time. So not just a one-off to get from A to B, but forever. and that requires systemization. So that is number 8. So what you'd have to do, obviously 1 to 7 broadly to need 8. But I'd also think about looking at pricing separately, and it's my big favourite topic. It technically falls under number 5, which is increasing transaction value, but I think it's so important to look at and so fundamentally capable of changing profits. I would look at it as a separate exercise, because pricing isn't just about adding to the figure you're selling for. There's a lot more to it than that. There's a whole load of psychology in it. There's loads of different ways to affect pricing, things that are happening to you day by day from loads of other businesses, probably without you even noticing. So I would think about pricing as probably the easiest way to make more money. And if you haven't had a pricing strategy review, I would strongly suggest doing that, because there's lots of hidden profit in that as a one way. So 2 extra bonuses there just to look at. Okay, so we've looked at the 7 ways. I just want to show you a little bit as to how that would actually work when we look at the actual numbers for a business. We have several bits of software we can do this with, but the one I tend to use a fair bit is called the growth equation software. And we did go through this, I think, last month in a little bit of detail, but it's so fundamental to looking at how you can grow profit that I'm going to run through it very quickly again. And there's 2 reasons for looking at the growth equation. One is that a lot of people think that to grow your business, you have to make substantial changes, and that's not true. What you may need to do is to make minor changes, but in more than one area. So if you're looking at the 7 ways, rather than change one way, i.e. getting more leads, by 50%, you might be able to get away with 3% in all of the 7 ways and achieve the same thing. So it helps clients and people we talk to understand that we're not talking about major shifts here. We're not talking about impossible things. It can just be a slight change in a number of areas. But it's also about identifying which areas are more likely to be changed and how that works in practice. So it's done on spreadsheet, and we can run through this. And effectively what you've got there is the top number is effectively position A, where we are now, and we then type in and work out what we think we can get for the bottom number, which is position B. So the first bit looks at, along with the 7 ways, how many customers have we got now? So obviously the existing customers isn't going to change. How many we start the year with is a figure. So that's 765. Then we're saying how many of those do we retain? And we're now changing that from 85% retention rate to 90. So whereas we would have had this year 650 customers buying, we've now planned for that to be growing to 689. We then look at how many new customers we're going to add from inquiries. So we've assumed that the number of inquiries will stay the same. That absolutely could be improved. We're also looking at, possibly with coronavirus, maybe the conversion rate isn't quite as high, possibly because competitors are reducing prices or because people are slightly more fussy. So we've reduced last year's conversion rate from 50% to 45%, and that still gets us what would have been 73 new customers down to 65. So we've now ended up with a total number of buying customers of 754. We then look at how often they're going to buy. So last year we knew that they bought just over once a year, 1.1 times, and we've now worked out some ways that we can get that up to 1.3. And then we've looked at the transaction value, average value of each transaction, each invoice or each till transaction was 780. We're now going to get that up to 800. And that now gives us a new annual sales figure. We then need to work out what our costs are. So we've worked out that typically 70% goes on labour and materials. We're going to try and get that down to 65. And overheads last year were 132,500. And actually we budgeted for that to increase because there will be professional fees, consultants, coaching fees to get those things to happen. But also there's going to be inflation just as standard as well, with a lot of overheads. So what that ends up with is, whereas the profit last year was 53,536, those numbers will produce a profit of 124,365. We haven't made substantial changes. In some areas, we've actually assumed something's going to be worse. And that is a very useful exercise to run through on your business, because it takes half an hour, provided we've got those numbers, and we can then start to plan what exactly is it that you're going to achieve, and is that going to fit your requirements? If not, how do we tweak it even further? And the other thing that highlights there, that even basically assuming that the value of the business is 3 times profit, which is probably understated, it's usually 4 or 5, but the value of the business has now increased by 212,000. So all of that is a substantial improvement. Obviously, still got to take the action, but knowing what we need to change and having some positive confidence about how substantial those changes will be should give people slightly more impetus to move upwards. So hopefully that makes sense. And I say it doesn't fit every business, but it fits many. If it doesn't fit your business, then we will have a growth equation software that will, and we can run through that if you wish. But that, I think, is quite good in illustrating why small changes can make a big difference. And if you look at success stories, so several examples, British cycling team, what they didn't go is we need to be 5% faster. What they did is they worked out 100 or 200 little things that they needed to be 1% better at. And that even went to the extent of how did they get from the hotel to the arena, things like that. All of those things were improved by 1%. And obviously, the number of gold medals spoke for itself at the end of it. So growth equation, important but really useful. And that sort of covers the bits I wanted to run through today. I hope all that makes sense. I do appreciate that a lot of those things will be known. That is always the case with business growth. If there was a magic wand to wave, I think we would have discovered that by now. It is basically all the things you think that have to be done to grow your business, but it might also be that converting it into a coherent strategy is probably the thing that might be missing. So knowing what to do, but how to do it and where to do it and in what ratios, what to attack first is probably the key bit, I think, in terms of growing profits. So there's some choices in terms of what to do next, because we said at the beginning, if you want things to change, then action does need to be taken. So first thing you could do is to do nothing. So you could go, well, that was a very nice webinar, but all seems a bit too hard, don't really understand it, and I won't do anything different. And as I say, the problem with that is even under the old adage of if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always got. I'm not sure that's even that true anymore. I think in the current climate, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're probably going to get less than you were getting before, because things will be moving on. So I'm not sure that's the right approach, especially if you're attending this webinar, because obviously growing your business seems to be a useful thing to look at. Next one is to retreat. So you go, might need to do a couple of things, but there's lots of things going on in the business. So I'll come back to those and maybe retreat back into doing some other bits and pieces. Again, same outcome as number one. The third one is to take normal action. So we can do some quick, easy things, but not really fundamentally change the business. And that can work quite nicely. But again, it would be useful to know that just some basic normal action is going to get you where you want to get to. So at least prove that the strategy you've got is going to get you to end up where you want to. In my experience, that doesn't usually happen because there's a lot of hope and what ifs built into that. And obviously the one we're recommending with all of these things is to take massive action, because if you look at it, what's the risk of not doing number four? The only risk is you're going to be spending a little more time trying to take massive action and then measuring what the results are. So if it doesn't work, then very little has been lost in that process. I say it's a little bit of time, a little bit of mental energy to do that. Chances are if you take a massive action, then there will be improvements in the business, and that will encourage you to keep taking massive action. So again, I think that's a comfort zone thing to not go with number four, rather than to look at that as the proper way forward. Okay, so as always, if you're a client, we're here for you, we're here to help, especially with the current situation. If you're not a client, then we're very happy to basically go through this stuff, free meeting, free phone call. My ethos in life is that basically we're keen to help businesses, whoever they are. They might be relatives of clients, they might be people that clients know, they might just be people we've come across at webinars. Always happy to help because they can take that knowledge away. It won't cost them a penny, but we do know that by and large what goes around comes around. So in the future that person might then go, I need some help, and they'll come back. But there's absolutely no commitment at our end. We're happy to give that knowledge, we're happy to discuss stuff, and again, there's nothing you can lose other than a little bit of time by doing that. So as I say, we don't charge by the hour. And for clients, there's also some free stuff as well. So we'll just go through that. So we have got, if you wanted to just go down the easy route, we've got a list of the 7 ways with some built-in action point space where you can list out your own actions. If you've thought of some things to do for each of those 7 ways, you can take that list, write in some ideas, and then start that moving in your organisation. That's absolutely fine. If you've picked up a few ideas from this session, you can fill those in. So if you want that, just put it into the chat box or email me. The email address will be coming up in a minute. We'll quite happily send you that for free. We're going to be sending up an email follow-up probably tomorrow, asking you what way forward you're going to use, to ask you if you need anything else to assist, and what have you. We're also able to do a free complimentary meeting, which can really look at any aspects of this, but typically I would imagine that's going to be looking at how do we get from A to B, can we have a look at the growth equation, etc. And that's a free meeting, up to probably an hour would be perfectly adequate, probably by phone, by GoTo meeting or Zoom in the current climate. And that's available for any of you. Just need to book that up and we can go through. Or if you wanted to get straight in, we do have a program where we do for other clients monthly and quarterly coaching. But the first one of those will basically be on a trial basis. So if you do it and you can't see that there's going to be any benefit, you can't notice things changing, then we will refund that monthly fee. So quarterly coaching is $160 per month, but the first quarter of that can be done immediately. So you do it month 1, month 4, month 7. And as I say, the first of those will be guaranteed. So it will allow you to sort of try effectively before you buy. But I know from experience that the only thing that can stop that working is really no action being taken after those coaching sessions. That's the immediate stuff relevant to today. Ongoing stuff that all of you have access to is our website. Details will come up in a minute, and our YouTube site. All of our previous webinars, I think, where I've remembered to click the button to record it, are uploaded to YouTube. So there's a whole load of stuff from previous subjects there. We're also going to be doing regular webinars ongoing. So I think the next couple are probably going to be along the lines of financial literacy, so understanding your accounts. It is surprising how, for something so important to running a business, there is not enough knowledge about how accounts and everything fits together. So we'll be doing one on those, and that is one that we've done previously live, and that out of all the 150, 200 live seminars we did, that got the highest score, surprisingly, because it seemed to us to be possibly the most technical, but because it was so relevant, but also explained, I think, very well, that it got a very high score from the attendees. So that's, even though it might not sound like the most sexy subject ever, it probably will be really useful. And we're also going to be doing one about personal budgeting. So once the money gets to your home, what you then do in terms of doing what we've talked about today, but with your home finances and personal exit strategy. We've also got the core asset vault that I mentioned. That's available free of charge. It's a huge, huge beast of sales and marketing stuff, to-dos, exactly how to do everything. If you haven't got a login to that and you're a client, you can have one. Just email me or put it in the chat and we'll get that to you. If you're not a client, we can talk about either becoming a client and having access to that, or we might be able to arrange access for a fee outside. On the back of that, Steve Hackney, the guy who created the Core Asset Vault, has also developed recently something called the 5-day challenge about selling more stuff. And all he does, it's a 5-day course, completely free. And all he does there is he goes into some of the key bits in the vault and goes into even more detail about how to do it. So he takes basically a standard marketing piece that a generic business has been creating. That's a real piece of marketing, just the business name has been blanked out. And then he goes through a 5-day process using the vault to show you how that piece of marketing material can be improved exponentially. And you can see by the day 5 that will obviously get you far more customers and leads than the original one. So again, just put 5-day challenge in the chat or questions, or email me and we'll get you that. There's a link and you just get each day you'll get a video. I think sometimes it's 2 videos just going through that process completely free. There is, because he's a sales and marketing guy, a small marketing offer at the end, but it's effectively offering you stuff that you can get through us. So there's no need for you to actually accept any marketing stuff from it unless you want to. And obviously we have free 1-hour meetings, complimentary client reviews for clients, and the KPI coaching I've just mentioned is available. And also our newsletters that come out, they're full of sales and marketing stuff and business growth ideas. So if you get those and tend to bin them, they are practical. They're not the typical boring stuff about, VAT legislation and things like that that accountants tend to send out. So let's have a quick look and just see if we've got any questions coming through. I've got one question which basically says, how do I know what the right KPIs are for my business? Well, as we said before, that the KPIs that you would be using would be relative to your business, and we'd be happy to go through those because each business will have its own different way of doing stuff, and therefore what's important to one won't be important to another. So I think at the beginning we did go through that a retailer will probably be more interested in the number of people coming in, the average spend that they do, and the margins they make, rather than sending out quotes and stuff like that. So I think there is loads of stuff on KPIs available. There's some on our website. There's loads of reading stuff on that. But it's really just going through and just understanding what KPIs are and picking the 4 or 5 most important ones for you. And I say, if you pick them and you want us to review them, happy to do that. If you want us to go through and pick them with you, happy to do that as well. But not something I think I can go through today for you. I think that's all we've got in terms of questions. So appreciate you attending today. I know things are probably very manic at the moment and you've taken time out, but I hope you've got some value from it. And more importantly, that I hope you go through and take some action and do something differently as a result. Otherwise, I haven't achieved my objective today. So last couple of bits is the parting thought for today is Jim Rohn, who's a successful business entrepreneur. Success is neither magical nor mysterious. Success is the natural consequences of consistently applying basic fundamentals. And I think today's been absolutely about that. So I appreciate you coming along today. If you do need to make contact or you want any further information, there's some contact details up on screen. But for the moment, thank you very much and hope to see you at next month's. If you know other business people and think they might find this useful, then feel free to share the link for next month's or come back to me with further questions if you haven't been prepared to ask them today. So thanks for that and hopefully speak to you soon. Bye.